again to the spin room of SCI-Arc Thesis 2020. I am here joined by Hernán Díaz Alonso, the director of the school, and Damjan Jovanovic. They have been both in reviews for 2 days, and we're going to talk to them about the past of thesis, the future of thesis, and how the medium of internet has somehow shaped our 2 days experience in the work. You will see in the background behind me coming up a series of images of the most important thesis I would imagine to be in the past 20 years of SCI-Arc. Not many of you know, but before Florenza Pita, I was the coordinator of thesis, and before me, it was Hernán Díaz Alonso. And so I took the time to put together the slides that somehow are characteristic of this 15 years arc from the beginning to the end of thesis of today, so that you can see a trajectory in the work. While the slides will keep on going in the back, I'm going to talk to Hernán about the relationship between thesis and pedagogy. Because one thing that is interesting when you look back at the thesis that we think of being a success is, first of all, how outdated they become very quickly. But then the second thing that comes to clear realization is that the students that produce the most interesting thesis, the most critical thesis, the one that really truly we look back and we think, this was a pivotal moment for the school, something happened at SCI-Arc that was special, something happened in the curriculum that shaped the curriculum afterwards, which really I think thesis at the best does, were individuals that went to practice as academic, actually. I call it specifically practice as academic because we produce a specific kind of students that understand practice as being a fundamental part of academia, but also that understand that academia has a role in their thinking as designers. And so I will leave to Hernán. The question is how thesis shapes the practice of an academic in their life at large.
The way I think we understand it on SCI-Arc, and like everything else that we think, there's a big chance that we're wrong, is that it's as much as the last project that they do in their education, in the career as a student, but it's more in the best case and in the good cases, which is the cases of the one that we've seen in the screen, are kind of a launching platform for a trajectory and a way of thinking for each of the architects who produce it. So in a way, it became the first stone step to a professional intellectual development. This is nothing really that new. I mean, this has happened through the history of architecture. We've seen it in many cases in which a thesis is the origin of lifetime projects for architects and educators and thinkers. So I still think it has an incredible value because first and foremost, I think it's a moment of in which each architect, each thinker have the possibility to reflect in terms of what is that curve of learning and what has been that path, and how that cannot be put together or proposed in the form of a thesis and in the form of a project. And again, as I said, I think in the best cases, in terms of the aspiration, what we want thesis to be, it became the first steps towards a professional life, a professional career. So I think that's the best that thesis have to offer as a pedagogical, academic, and professional tool.
I know that when you started thesis, somehow thesis was not something that the curriculum had, and it was a provocation to tell you, you're going to institute thesis in the program, and because you did not believe in thesis. Do you believe in thesis now?
I do. I mean, yeah, it's true that the main reason was I was asked to coordinate thesis at the time was because I was very much opposed to the notion of thesis, particularly because we were going through a period of transition in which the massive eruption of technology and computer came to it, and for some strange reason, at that time, I used to think that it was the collective or kind of a more the research oriented was the vehicle. But I come around big time. I come around 180 degrees because I really think thesis became this. It's an individual moment of reflection, but also it's a collective moment of reflection for the school, for the program, for the faculty. But also, I think it's important. It's a moment that the architect, the person working in the thesis, take control of it. I always think that as a faculty, I think when you teach studios, the failure or success of the work is part of the frame of the studio, which I think in the thesis, if you take your job seriously as an advisor, it's just to be there to provide guidance to each of the authors. So I think there is an important value about thesis in finding each voice, but also finding the collective voice. And also it's a good place also for allow all the different voices in the school to be expressed. I think I was completely wrong in what I thought at the time to have a kind of a desire for a more homogeneous way of thinking. And I think thesis is valuable because of that, because it produced a wonderful disruption of all the voices from students and advisors coming together, and also to have a healthy intellectual battle for the center of the discussion of the discipline. And I think this is absolutely vital. And I think thesis in many ways, in grad, but also in undergrad, I would argue thesis always became a moment of reflection of the school about where we're going with the curriculum. Because in a way, it's a combination of multiple years that we've been working on something collectively.
I couldn't agree more that the thesis by definition is the moment where one questions what we do as architects, and the students are asked these questions every year. I think somehow this year in a special way, it was true not only for our students, but for the school as a community that wonder what we do as architects in a moment where we're all working remotely, we are going through a social awakening, and there is a lot actually on the table for us to discuss on what we contribute to in terms of architecture. So I would say that it's true that the thesis is a moment of individual discovery, but I would say that it's a moment of institutional discovery and institutional rebirth. I have a question also for Damjan. Damjan, welcome to the SCI-Arc spin room. Thank you for being here with us. I think this year we had a very specific medium we work with, which is this medium of the television, the monitor, the screen, the digital, the internet is what we have to talk to each other and to be with each other. And I would like you to maybe to talk to us about the fact that maybe we're all eyes and ears right now. There is no touch, there is no immersiveness, there is no wanderlust of architecture in the sense of space, but in a way, it somehow maybe focused our senses onto two that are very important, and maybe narration became more important, maybe the visual became more important. Can you talk to us about this medium and how you see this limitation of today actually focusing maybe the work of the students?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that I really noticed in this batch, and also maybe last year when I was doing thesis as well, is that there is a kind of a heightened attention to this problem of identity and kind of personal expression within, let's say, the kind of the politics of platforms that people are inhabiting, right? And especially now when we are all kind of within this virtual presence kind of regime and everyone is constantly online, and there's an interesting dynamic, I think, happening also between the students where there is far less, let's say, hierarchical idea of how students talk between themselves and also how they talk to advisors on the one hand. But there is, I think, another thing that comes out of this is basically a question of how do I present myself and how do I work with these new technologies in a way where I'm not subject to the kind of the platform, default or to this idea that the platform is presenting me in a certain way. So I think what I've seen in my kind of batch was the attention to kind of really personal expression and this idea of kind of working with tools where tools are not anymore just simply used for some ideas of problem solving or some ideas of kind of just producing kind of known formats and kind of classical or traditional ways that we are making architecture, but tools are now becoming a topic in and of itself. And I think so software is also becoming a cultural force, and it's not merely a technical problem anymore. It's, I think that's where also Zoom and these kind of platforms where we are constantly, they will be used, they will be also misused, and they will be put into question by the kind of the best projects as well. So
I couldn't agree more. Even the virtual background has become a design project. I mean, even in Thesis, I realized looking at what is starting to happen is that the green screen, the split screen, the Zoom backgrounds, the way in which we talk to each other, the way in which we organize the microphone, somehow things that we thought were default of software now are highly sophisticated. We look at them in a highly sophisticated way. We understand their limits and we want to expand them. I mean, I think if at some point this was a digital bucket, the digital bucket actually is becoming, we have to put things in many drawers, and these affinities that we saw and we understood as being somehow under the same umbrella. Now we're actually quite critical about how you can use them and how you can express yourself through that. And what about the role of narrative? I also find this interesting, what happens when you don't have an object in front of you, but you're a person that is expressing, their thoughts about a project. I think somehow it heightened also the problem of the narrative, how explaining a project became fundamental this year.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed with me is that I tend to keep track of where I'm looking at when a Zoom project is presented, and there is an interesting probably kind of pattern emerging where it's either at the project or even sometimes at my own kind of square. And I think there is kind of a tendency in Zoom that we are, we become almost like performers for ourselves, and because it's kind of difficult, I guess, to really project always in front and to be somehow faced with this lack of response, because sometimes it's difficult to know if someone is on the other side, really.
I agree with you. I think it was Hernán that was mentioning what it does to you to see yourself while you talk to other people. There is a psychological effect on seeing yourself while you express your ideas, and the control you're starting to have on your emotional trait on your face and what you start projecting outside. So I think I agree with you that this medium made us performers more than what we were aware. And maybe this is actually part of a thesis, meaning how do we control the medium of expression in a more sophisticated way to create an audience towards
I always remember that scene from a movie where an actor is kind of in front of a mirror and they're kind of preparing for the big role. And I think this is maybe what Zoom has brought, this kind of endless proliferation of individual actors that talk to themselves in some way. But I don't know, maybe that's...
Going back to Hernán, maybe Hernán, if you want to talk to us, but when we say thesis is the moment that we question things, I would say that we had a summer where we questioned the institution, and maybe these are something that you can speak to, because I think we have been questioned by our body of students, and I think their ideas and their input has been taken quite seriously from the administration. And in a way, I think this thesis has been a thesis for the entire institution. Like, we all graduate, I think, tomorrow, actually.
Yeah, I think when you are confronted with multiple crises at the time, like a pandemic, global crisis, the social injustice for Black lives, and lack of equality for minorities in this country and in many others, you had to ask yourself, what are you doing? What are your shortcomings? Why you haven't done why you didn't do what you're supposed to do, or you were not paying attention. So it has been, and it is, a moment of reckoning, but also it's a moment of awakening. And I think it's also an historical time. And I think it's an extraordinary time for us to rethink what is the role of the school, what is the role of architecture in all this. And I think we have to be very, very humble about it, and we cannot presume to have the answer. I think it's a moment to understand that this is a moment that we have to reinvent ourselves, or reinvent one part of ourselves, or to reboot certain things. So in a way, collectively, the students, the faculty, the staff, the people who are the people who we are with the responsibility in the school, is a moment of reflection and questioning. And this is something I think any institution should do on a regular basis. But for sure, when we have this, and on top of that, we have the wildfires going in California, that is a permanent reminder of the ecological tragedy that we are living every day. So we have all this. We have these confluences of extraordinary crisis, and if we don't look ourselves in the mirror, if we don't ask ourselves what we're doing, what we should be doing, okay, so we don't deserve to be doing this job. So I think the way that you put it, that this is a thesis, that is the thesis of the school, that is a thesis the students are doing, but also there is a thesis that what is a School of Architecture on how we should do this. I think this is, in a way, we are at the beginning of that process. We are in the very beginning of thesis prep, and we had to work and develop a thesis for it, and be very, very open-minded and very reflective about it. So in that sense, again, thesis is a moment to elevate all the different points of view and on all the different questions. I think this is time to do that, and to reformulate, and to rebuild what we need to rebuild, and move forward what we need to move forward, and change and replace what is wrong or what hasn't been done in the right way. So in that sense, it's not different than a thesis. So yeah, these are incredibly extraordinary, critical times, and in a way, is one way or another. I think is a permanent state of an architect, and I think we have to raise to the occasion, and we have to confront it, and we have to fight for it, and we have to move forward and grind. And it is a lot of work to be done, but it's yeah. It's an interesting way to see it, that this is a moment of thesis. It's a moment to set up the future of it. So in the same way that we're talking about the thesis students being the beginning of the next phase, this is a time for us to be the beginning of the next phase, which of course is a reflection of things that you learn, but you want to produce a shock and produce things and push you and project you forward.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, because we've been teaching for a long time. I think all of us, and you can see that the status of question and happens in the students when they start thesis. What should I be thinking about? How should I spend my time? And what is meaningful for me to do in this time frame? And I think the institution has done this during the summer, and in a way has been a collective thesis that was a participation of the faculty, the students, and the administration. And I think certain things has been brought to the table as proposition of things that need to change. And it was, I think, an incredibly powerful time for us. We are being joined by other two faculties, Neimark and Mira. They are both thesis advisor at SCI-Arc. They have been teaching in the graduate program and the undergraduate program for a long time. And they are advisors of our students, and they are coming out of the reviews to join us in this informal conversation. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Mira, for being here. Hernán Díaz Alonso and Damjan Jovanovic, they talked about the thesis as a trajectory for the students. With Hernán, we looked at the old thesis from 15 years, and the thesis that somehow started the career of our students into teaching, actually. And with Damjan, we talked about the medium of the internet, the performance through Zoom, and how that changes the narrative or the project. I think these are two questions that maybe also the two of you could talk to. And I would love to see or to hear the point of view of Anna. How do you see the thesis changing because of the medium of.
I think this is my cue to leave the spin room
Yes,
and go
I know,
back to
I know.
reviews, correct?
Yes, I know. I know
All
you
right.
both, Damjan and Hernán. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate you being here. And we'll move to the other guests that today will give us their view
Bye, Mira. Bye,
on
Anna.
thesis.
Bye, Elena.
Ciao. Thank you.
Hi, Hernán. Bye,
So-
Damjan. And good to see you. And hi, Elena. Thank
Hi,
you for
hi.
inviting us. It's really nice to be here.
So you
Hi,
know that I'm
Mira.
actually at SCI-Arc so today. So believe it or not, I am in school with the entire team. It's fantastic to be here.
Well, that's cool.
So,
That's very nice.
And I was hoping you could talk to us about how you see thesis changing this year, because of, I think one big factor is definitely the performance in front of the camera, the performance through the medium,
Yeah.
and how I think this medium has changed, focused or reduced, making more creative assets for us to think about in terms of thesis.
No, it's a great question, Elena, because we've gone through so many different kind of shifts and avenues this summer. And one of them, of course, we started out the spring with the COVID-19 pandemic, which meant that we all had to go into our homes and isolate ourselves and work independently. And I have to say that for a thesis student, to work independently is what we ask of thesis students, but it's very mental. It's a mental space that they have to access somehow. And what kept everybody's sanity together was always the studio space. The studio environment is the collaboration of many individuals coming together and really working together. And that is very difficult to reconcile with the way in which we're working right now in Zoom. So that's something that, of course, we try to kind of produce dialogues. And I think that in some ways, like, there may be two upsides to Zoom. One has to do with us being able to bring in voices from all over the world constantly into our windows on a matter of minutes from a phone call. Somebody jumps in and comments on a project, which is amazing. The second one is a kind of side effect of, you know, we're all at home in our comfort of our home. And so I see a student starting to smoke and somebody starting to kind of speak to their family member. There are different things that give us comfort in our own home. And that's something that we don't normally have in the studio space. Now, to shift a little bit and to speak to the other parts, in terms of the ideas that have come to the foreground as well that have to do with politics, I think that has been an even more powerful conversation, at least in my group, or in the group in the kind of also at SCI-Arc in general. The Black Lives Matter protests, our own participation, our students' participation, our activism has really activated also many thesis projects. And I thought that was absolutely incredible. So, like, on the one hand, we have this kind of mode of isolation, mode of working kind of separately but together. And on the other hand, we have a way of coming together and actually collaborating and speaking to a bigger issue, to an issue that has a clarity of values and ethics that we have never shared before, I think. And I'm sure, Mira, I'm seeing that you're nodding. I want to kind of open it up as well, because I find that it has really transformed our ability as architects, like the conversation, the discussion, the energy surrounding kind of ideas of how to be engaged, the values of ourselves as citizens and ourselves as architects in our cities, really re-energized our students and our thesis work.
I was mentioning before to Hernán that the thesis is the moment where the students question everything. No, you question what is worth your time. First of all, you're opening the problem of thesis thinking, what is worth for me doing, and what should I be thinking about, and how does that, you know, impact the discipline or impact the world around me. So there is this, I think there is questioning moment, and we could call it ethic, but I think it's wider than that. It's a doubt moment of this directing your energy, your practice, your intellectual capacity, your talent towards something that you think is meaningful and defining in your career. Is the moment where you go from being a student to becoming an architect. This thesis actually projects quite a bit into your professional life afterwards. We've seen during the career talks how much of the thesis is actually very still in the practice of all of us. And I was mentioning to Hernán that somehow this year is not only student questioning, and it's not anymore a quest for novelty on your own, like, oh, how can my thesis matter? How can my thesis be new? To a body of knowledge, a body of work that has been done before, which is a very hard task, by the way, to position yourself in a meaningful position within the rest of the discipline. I think this year it was a collective thought. So we are all questioning the position of architecture within the social realm. How, as an institution, do we respond to what there is around us? And I do think that somehow was a thesis prep for the entire school this summer. And maybe I was hoping that Mira could talk about this. I think has been a thesis prep for the administration, for the faculty, along with the students. And the students gave us their creative energy. You know, it's kind of a privilege to be able to see all the work coming from all the screens and computer generated vision, somehow the beams in your eyes. So they gave us their answer, but I think the school as well has produced, if not an answer, at least a sort of action towards those answers.
Mm-hmm. I call it the meltdown. That's what I think about this time. It's the meltdown. So, you know, the meltdown has produced a certain amount of clearing away, and there's been a sort of clearing away. And I think that it's actually, in order to, in a non-destructive sense, it's actually opened up. I think it's swept some things out of the way and opened up some space. And I've actually found that the level of conversation it's been kind of freeing, right? It's been kind of freeing to say, you know, like the values that are being, the terms of the work that I as a student and I as a faculty member, that what we bring has value, and to not assume that one needs to be constantly kind of returning back to, say, canonical conversations in order to be like make valid the thoughts, the feelings, the responses, the instincts, the sensibilities, all of these things. I mean, this has been quite liberating, quite liberating. And sort of, I felt it actually, the shift in terms of the way in which my thesis student and I kind of talked about things and how we valued them, and like what was really at stake. Really what was at stake was developing a space of knowledge. And of course, this is always what we want. But there was something about this year that actually pivoted in a newly authentic way to say, I'm gonna slow down a little bit, and I'm gonna sit with some things a little bit longer. And all the deadlines they're gonna come. And I felt like that, but nonetheless, I'm still going to approach it in a way that is somehow filtered through my own experience, my own thinking, rather than assuming that the answers are coming from that which I've already read, that which I've already known. I mean, that is what has been powerful about this time, a sort of saying a way of giving, you know, value and space for the voices of every single person, right? And that those things are somehow they belong in architecture. And that discomfort of that, terrible discomfort of that, right? Now the question is, how do we build knowledge around this? How do we build knowledge around the individual experience, right? In the relationship? That is a real question. I have total confidence that knowledge will be produced, that it will not be a sort of one-off and the sort of personal. I mean, there have been so many interesting conversations around students trying to grapple with like just the simple sort of isolation of their own space, and also the desire to be able to put themselves into their work in new ways. You know, a sort of critique of that would be that this is just a kind of conversation around the personal, and it's very idiosyncratic and is no longer in discourse. And I think that fundamentally how we start to create conversations given that is really what's exciting about this time as well.
May I ask a question? Because I completely agree that it's a time for expansion of sensibilities that are actually there, frankly.
Yeah.
And they simply are more accessible. And I'm actually quite convinced that in a weird way, social media and have a lot to do with the liberation of of those sensibilities. If you talk about the aesthetic practice, that actually being able to express and having even just an audience that has the same feeling, and then expanding what we understand as being the canonical accepted norm into the multiple sensibilities that are there, is actually a lot to do with the platforms we're using for communication. I'm bringing this to you, maybe you have a different opinion about it. Do you think social media and digital tools and digital media of communication has a democratizing power? And is the democratizing power of these tools heightened also by this moment of isolation that we all have this platform to go by, and that creates a much more participatory process into the production of knowledge, aesthetic, and as a beginning ground for discussion? I'm opening it because maybe you have different opinions, so it would be great to hear what you think.
I would say yes in politics, no in architecture. Okay. And I'm sure I have a lot of people who disagree. So I would say yes in politics, because social media experience, as Mira is referring to it, witnessing, posting, making visible those kinds of power dynamics that we normally might not be aware of, has been the most powerful tool in the last few years. It has been the most powerful tool in politics, in news media, in also activism, and just kind of bringing people to see. We have to see, we have to visualize the violence. We can't just read about it in the papers. And even in the papers, we don't understand it until evidence is given to us, given over to us by the authorities, right? So in politics, absolutely. I feel like in architecture, and this is something that I found so fascinating, within our group of students with whom I worked this summer, the practice of working on a project, whether it has to do with ways of exchanging information, documenting the site, working with physical models and digital spaces, site documentation, interviewing, etc. Those practices haven't really changed. So maybe I'm in the minority here, but in the group in which I participated, studio culture persisted, and physical space and digital space were on par with one another. One didn't overshadow the other. And I think it's because architectural production had always already anticipated this remote moment. We always already were working remotely with digital tools, with experimentation that had to do with a kind of construct of a world that brought together the physical and the digital. And for the students, it was a no-brainer. It was just, we were going to keep working the same way we always worked. And they reproduced the studio environment in their kitchens, in their bedrooms, in their homes, next to a baby, next to their spouse, next to their roommate. And they were able to continue to document physical models, digital experiences, and produce even themselves as a kind of persona or avatar, as a kind of collaborator within a greater space of that kind of production, which I was so impressed with.
And Mira, what do you think? Social media have changed and has enabled is it a democratizing power for architecture as well as politics?
I would say, I'm not a positivist in this sense. I'm not. But there has been, there's been incredible collectivity. Aside from politics separate, but the collectivity of and I don't know about social media as much as just digital platforms have produced collectivities that I've experienced. I know that my students have experienced. I as an educator and as a architectural thinker, have begun to kind of benefit from, and that comes from just being able to collapse the sort of spatial divide that Anna is referring to, bringing people together across the world, across the country, particularly when it comes to, collectivity. We need collectivity, particularly for marginalized voices. Collectivity is so important, and the role that technology has played in that and social media has played in that has been incredibly critical. So it's a piece. To me, it's not the answer. It's a piece of the puzzle. There's still, to me, I mean, the sociality, the physical sociality of architecture, to me, is still so critical as well. So, and I don't think that can ever be somehow eliminated, or like that will always become a part of it. I don't think that social media will ever be able to necessarily address that. And again, like questions of access, like all of these things, when it comes to certain kinds of platforms, I think that it's always a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I wouldn't be kind of hyperbolic in the way that I see its total effect, but I'm certainly enjoying a great deal of connectedness with people that I wouldn't have otherwise. And I think that that actually is a form of building a way of beginning to build knowledge.
No, I mean, on my side, I do think that has been an incredibly powerful force, and I think to me is also a powerful force when it comes to visualization of what is allowed to be visualized. I mean, what is the democratizing power of the aesthetic of tools like Instagram, to me, has changed our visual culture, has allowed for different spectrum of colors to exist in the realm of architecture. Actually, I do think that we could not underestimate what is the visual effect that certain things have on us. We're cultural animals. We are influenced by what we see, and I think what we see is much wider than what we used to see. We are also joined by Kristy Balliet. I think she's coming to our Zoom, and thank you for being here, Kristy Balliet. So first of all, I would like to introduce her because she will take on thesis coordination next year. So this is your last year as just being an advisor. Next year you will have a much harder task.
Having a summer.
Yeah, the last time in the summer, so enjoy it until you laugh, if we can call it summer. So, Kristy, welcome to the discussion. Anna and Mira have been talking to us about a few things. One is the role of social media, or in general, digital tools in thesis and how they have impacted the work of the students, and maybe in a larger scheme of things, how they are a democratizing force, if there is or they're not, in terms of what they have done in general for thesis and in general for the SCI-Arc community, and maybe some thoughts also about the fact that this is a moment of recollecting thoughts for the students and questioning what they should be doing. And I would say that the school at large, the administration, faculty, and students has been going through a moment of coming to terms with what we've done in the past, what we have to change for the future, and how things move forward from here now. So we're also joined by John Cooper, who is now joining us from England. I think for you it's middle of the night. Thank you for being here. We enjoy waking you up or keeping you awake at times that you should be asleep, but you know, I didn't sleep I know that's the beauty of this connectivity. So John Cooper and Kristy Balliet will both be the new thesis coordinator next year. So we're doubling up on this because we thought Florenza Pita did an amazing job, and we needed two people to replace her, and also because we have high ambitions for the program. And so we think that one person cannot do it, we have to have two. And so John Cooper joins us from the history theory side, Kristy Balliet on the design studio side. One is more on the Mark 2 and Mark 1. So somehow we're trying to get a wider spectrum of voices and, you know, also change the format of thesis as we have been doing this year. So John, Kristy, this new medium, which is not new, has been there for 20 years, which is this internet computer thing that we have in front of us that for now is the only thing we have to connect us. How did it change thesis? Did it change thesis or not?
I definitely think it has impacted, and I guess when you impact something, you also change it in many ways. The one that maybe is most significant, it might also just be the one review that I'm just coming off of the student Taiyan Wang. He, I think increasingly we've been talking about, I mean, I think the world has been talking about, but we've been talking about how when you have an idea, when you represent that idea, when you communicate that idea,
how can it reach more audiences, many types of audiences? And I think even though that's probably something we've been talking about for a long time, the fact that you're packaging your presentation for something that can go onto a website, can be presented on Zoom, I think has the students already thinking about the audience of the critique, of the jury, of the discipline, but also has the students thinking about how the things they're producing can immediately go out into the world via YouTube or via their own website. And I think that's had a really, in a lot of ways, a positive impact, that the students recognize that what they're producing isn't going to be just seen within the walls of the school, but that it immediately will be seen by many types of people sitting in many different places.
Are we all eyes and ears now, and there is nothing else than those two senses now that we are seeing each other through a screen? So is it all about the visuals and what we say about it? Or and no more tactile, no more textures, no more touch? Or does it take another form?
No, I think that's just kind of phase one of like the kind of new existence. And I feel that I don't think that screens and digitality and social networks are the only way that we have to connect with each other at all. I think there's a million other ways. And I also think it's not just about the eyes and the ears. And I think it might sort of feel like that, but I think that's just because it's phase one. And I already see people now getting kind of sick of phase one and wanting to take it apart and do other things with it. And you know, we've had students who've been working, say, on sound, and like switching. I was just in a review when the visuals were switched off, and the jury was told to close its eyes. And actually, that was a kind of really radical move for everybody to enter into a sort of different state of alertness. And then the sensorium, you know, suddenly sound becomes intensely physicalized. Like it has a kind of ingrained corporeality, and then something like an architectural voice emerges, which kind of makes you tingle, and then your capacity to be provoked, seduced, revolted, distressed, and so on is heightened. And so that seemed to me an instance where the screen and the kind of mediation through the screen was sort of like subverted or rerouted by the audio. And so I think what one might see going forward is like ever renewed attempts to reclaim the territory of the body from top to toe, and not just the one body, but the many bodies cohabiting in new ways beyond the Zoom backdrop. And that I think whatever happens with quarantine and access and whatever, I think sort of the going out into the field is, and I don't know, maybe even this has been spoken about before I arrived. I feel like in that kind of Margaret Atwood post-apocalyptic way, how do you continue to navigate and explore and kind of investigate? To me, that's the real interest of like the next phase two.
So are we going to see avatars next year? The body, the new body, whatever embodied by so the digital body and the image of the body will come. I can see that we're going to have an avatar at SCI-Arc next year. I always wanted one. I've been asking this for 5 years to Hernán. So we need an avatar to embody our school and to do reviews and somehow to learn from us and to reproduce our knowledge. And maybe then going back to the physical world, how, Anna, do you see the role of the physical model, which I think has been an incredible part of SCI-Arc thesis for a long time. I mean, the spectacle of thesis, I would imagine, if I would have to say in a very banal terms, lied a lot on the crafts of the artifact and the sense of wonder. How could they do this? How could they create this aesthetic quality? How could they imagine this formal expression? And the physical presence of those objects did create an aura and a desire and an audience that was so specific to thesis at SCI-Arc. So how do you imagine that could be or still exist or change its format now, given the situation that we are in? So how can the physical model still exist? I'm asking because I think a lot of your practice is based on this nuanced quality that I think you have to be in presence to see. I mean, it's a close reading of those objects, which I think you do with the students, and they're quite fantastic for that reason.
That's a great question, Elena. I absolutely agree that we can no longer touch the physical model, but the physical model, as we understand it, always comes to us through the medium of photography, in fact. So one thing that we have maybe learned to appreciate this summer is that there is no such thing as a physical model without its photographic representation. And we learned this very early from Thomas de Mand, and we learned this from every single article that we read, where we are encountering models that no longer survive and that have been documented in some way or form through photography. And so we'll see this throughout the weekend. We'll see students sharing their modeled spaces. We'll see them live kind of imaging ways of working and moving through these artifacts. But we'll also see very careful constructions of these models, and we'll see a kind of representation of representation of representation. We'll see the kind of like very layered space of production of that lens of visuality, right? So like we'll actually understand how to look at something because that point of view has already been established through the image. And that's something that, you know, we always get in the portfolio. We don't always get it within the space of the thesis because we always think of a thesis as a live experience. We don't always consider it as a kind of archive of a project that's already been finished. But that's something that we'll definitely encounter this weekend.
Thank you, Anna, who've been joined by Donald. Thank you for being here. I am going to ask the question that I ask. Do you have thesis in your school, first of all? Do you?
We run it in two different ways. So we have thesis studios. So we have just basically regular studios that are working under a project. And, you know, there's about 15 or 16 students in a studio, and they do their own project under that kind of group direction and such. But they have particular requirements in terms of a publication that they have to put together, in terms of deliverables, in terms of scale of production, and so on and so forth. Then we also, for you know, maybe less than 10% of the students, they have an option of doing an independent thesis where they determine their own project and effectively write their own brief and their own research theme and develop it. And then they have a supervisor who helps try to guide it along. And so,
and if you would have to describe the role of thesis, would you imagine that the thesis in your school is more about research, so it's more advanced in terms of specific research body, or it is a personal endeavor? Meaning, how do you see this in your school, and how do you see this comparing to SCI-Arc? You've been in reviews today, so I'm sure that you have some thoughts about this.
Well, I mean, in a way, it's both. You know, I mean, certainly we expect the thesis students to state a kind of supposition and to do research. So to back it up with, you know, whether it's looking at precedents, whether it's looking at a particular historical tendency, whether it's, you know, finding out information, you know, like one of the ones that we saw today was about a kind of full new self-sustaining city. So we would expect a student doing a project like that to have done enough research to say, well, for a, you know, for 100,000 people, you need to grow this many tons of vegetables, or you need to have this much meat, or you have to have this based on population, blah, blah, blah. So there would be a certain level of supporting documentation, but it's not research in the sense of it's a scientific research program. It's still a design project. So we expect them to develop the design as a design proposition but the research component is the kind of backgrounding and support framework for the issues.
And so if you would have to summarize, what do you think the pedagogical role of thesis is in the curriculum? What would you imagine that to be? I'm going to ask this question to all of you guys, John, Kristy, and Donald. I think it would be great to hear from all of you about this.
Well, I think we do it at the University of Melbourne, RMIT does it, where usually the notion of the thesis is beyond a project. So, a regular project is something usually, first of all, that's given to you, given to a student. It's couched within the sort of directionality of the studio, and it's the studio's interest. And then there is the individual student's response to that. Whereas with the thesis, we expect students to, even when they're working within a studio, to develop their own trajectory and to take ownership of their own trajectory as a response to that. But we also expect them to a certain degree, kind of state the conditions of the thesis. So there is an obligation to, and I should add to that, we expect it to advance knowledge. So as opposed to just being a exploitation of students' work, that it actually advances a degree of knowledge.
And so, John, what do you think the role of thesis is in the curriculum?
Well, many roles, and I think that depends a lot on the individual basis. But I guess I did my thesis in a kind of art historical academic context, where there was a very strong emphasis on research. And it seems to me that the most successful thesis projects I've seen, they genuinely go out and find out about something in depth, in real depth. And I think there's a lot of times when the kind of research element of studio work, it has to be rapid. And there's a value in doing that rapid, prolific research. But I think with a kind of a year-long project, you have the opportunity to go really, really deep down into something and to get through layers and misapprehensions and challenge the fundamental basis of your knowledge, have it tested and tested over and over again, until you really get down to some ineradicable core of knowledge that you can then identify with and make the basis of your intellectual, personal, communal growth for a long time. So I'd say it's that sort of prolonged research to get down to some ineradicable thing. Because I caught the end of a discussion about kind of social media and stuff earlier, and I feel like everybody is subject to so much external vicissitude. So easy for oneself to get taken out of yourself and distracted, and to kind of covet other things and forms of attention and recognition. And I feel the thesis project is actually a way of kind of turning involution, turning inside to identify something that you can kind of protect and mask within yourself, so that whatever happens outside, pandemics and all kinds of whatever, big difficult things, conflict, trauma, whatever, you can carry on that research project through all of it, and kind of grow and be elevated because of it. So I think that thesis is where you can begin that.
And what about you, Kristy? How do you see the problem of thesis in the curriculum? What do you imagine to be the role of thesis in the curriculum?
Yes, sorry, Donald, did you want to say something?
Look, I was just going to say, I think that question of time is actually really important, because our thesis is done in a semester, which is really 12 academic weeks of work, 13, 14 weeks. Whereas, when I taught at the AA, one of the great things about the AA was that you do a whole year project, whether you're a second-year student or a fifth-year student, whereas our student work is cut up into semester times of 12 or 14 weeks. And it's hard to do any authentic research in the first 2 or 3 weeks and then do the project. So I think having a whole year to develop a thesis is a vastly different operation than trying to fit it into a 12 or 14-week span.
Yeah, I agree. I think I love that we have the longer period here and that it caps off the curriculum. I think to answer your question, Elena, I think one of the major roles that I see it having within a curriculum is that it is the moment when a student can dive deep into a topic that can allow them to become more confident as a designer, to be able to host conversations about a topic that I love how John said, that they've been able to kind of develop internally that gives them something that they can lean back on at different points and that they can develop on. And I think that I would just maybe add to that I think as a designer, figuring out different ways to develop confidence, and I don't mean arrogance, but to have a confidence that you have an internal project that you are working on, that you then can communicate sometimes through a project that might be building based, but in other times you could communicate that project that you're working on in a conversation, in a paper, in an article. And that by knowing what you're working on, it also allows you, I think, as part of a curriculum, the students to begin to understand who they might be in conversation with. Historically, but also in their contemporary realm. I think now more than ever, a student could be working on a problem. They can look around in the school that they are in, but they can also look to contemporaries outside of the school that they're in to see what types of conversations are happening, to find those other folks that might have these similar micro interests that I think is something that I don't necessarily think we had access to when I was doing my thesis. But I would say now, that's a huge part of the conversation, that you have the confidence of the project you're working on and that you're able to kind of host a conversation or be part of a conversation with others' peers.
Do you think there is a collective thesis at SCI-Arc? I'm asking this question mainly to Donald, maybe even John, people that somehow haven't seen thesis in depth because you're somehow outside of the institution. I mean, John, I know you've been here for a year and you've been looking at some thesis, but I do think that you still have an outsider role in a way. You're not in it enough to be complacent. My sense is that it's much easier from the outside to see a collective project. Is there a collective project at SCI-Arc? And if that is the case, what is that?
If you mean collective, you mean for the whole of SCI-Arc? I mean, or as SCI-Arc as an entity, or?
Yeah, as an institution, what is that we work on? It's clear, I think, in thesis to see, okay, sure, each project is different. This project is personal. This project is a personal moment, but in reality, it isn't. Truly, it is a collective endeavor, and it is, and there are threads, I think, that connect them. And I was wondering if that's the case to you too, and if that's the case, how do you see it from the outside?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly like most schools, there are, there's a kind of plurality of directions, but at the same time, there are characteristics that are identifiable and such. So I think, there are aspects to the work of SCI-Arc that both set it apart, but also identify it in terms of both thematics, but, and it's quite clear, particularly at the thesis level, that a lot of it comes through, and I mean this in a really complimentary way, they come through the role of the supervisor, that there are strategies, techniques, interests, propensities that the supervisors have, and therefore I'm sure that the students gravitate to those teachers exactly because of that, but then the work sort of carries on that trajectory exactly because the questions and the critiques would probably most likely follow along some of those same lines of inquiry and everything. So I think there definitely are. I mean, I'd probably be a little bit hard-pressed right at this moment to identify them, but they certainly exist in terms of the kind of hyper visualization, hyper real, not hyper real, but I mean the use of graphics, whether that's animation graphics, whether that's pure visual graphics. You know, there's very little, although one of the reviews I was on yesterday was sort of like housing typologies, looking at, you know, kind of more or less conventional housing typologies and following that through. But I would say that a lot of the work is doing a lot with visualization and kind of confrontation with imaginative visualization. So not at all trying to render photorealism, but actually anti-photorealism, and yet make it believable as an experience or something.
What about you,
that would
John?
be
What
my
do you think? What do you think is a collective project, if there is one? I'm putting you from the outside because I do think you have a view still. You're still far enough.
Well, I suppose, yes. No, what I've heard, what Donald just clearly articulated, I feel I've heard in different ways articulated at other times. And that represents some kind of a synthesizing tendency. Whether that amounts to a collective institutional project, I don't know. That could be a trait and a series of affinities and converging tendencies, but does that amount to an institutional project? I'm not sure. I think the very nature of an institutional collective project is, I think, probably up for redefinition right now. I don't know whether that means adopting something like a shared kind of ideological front. I don't think so. I think actually the school, well, maybe all institutions kind of thrive on a certain carefully curated antagonism of ideologies. But I would say that there is a sense in which there might be, and this is something I would say that is perhaps adventitious in the sense that it might be emergent, it might be kind of coming, but not here yet, but a sense that all tendencies must be engagements. And I think that, to me, that is what just in the time I've been here, this like last 12 months, the emergence of a coming kind of shift maybe to recognize the power of all of those visual characteristics to translate them into engagements, entanglements with real world situations and problematics. I don't know whether that's whether Elena, you would agree with that, or Kristy, but that's just a kind of.
I just think it's good to ask, because sometimes when I look at the work, I think there are projects definitely that we don't do. I mean, as an institution, and there are projects that when you talk to the students, they have this clarity about, okay, this is not a SCI-Arc project. This is something that we don't do. The project of SCI-Arc is such, no? So it's about novelty, it's about visual engagement. So there are certain things we do very well, I think, and certain things we don't do. And sometimes I find it interesting to ask who comes from outside is what the meta project is, because I think there is, and I agree there is a carefully orchestrated antagonism of voices, but I think at times it came actually quite together. I mean, I think the variety of voices was a decision making, and also when they converge to one voice, it's also decision making of the ingredients. But to me, it's very interesting to see from outside what you see, because we are sometimes very close to our heart when we look at our students' project. And from the outside, it's clear that there are much bigger umbrellas under which we all are. I was wondering if, Kristy, you have also an answer to this. Do you think there is a meta project at SCI-Arc or a few meta projects? And if it is the case, what they are, or if that's not the case, and it's always a singular project? I think there are allegiances, basically. But what I'm trying to say, and although we craft this as a singular project of the student that is going through a certain questioning, and the question is personal, in reality, actually, there is a much bigger component of almost like a tribe of ideas coming together. Yes. But what do you think, Kristy?
Yeah. I don't know that I have the fresh eyes anymore, but I can recall, I mean, my introduction to SCI-Arc years ago was by invitation, coming as a juror to Thesis. And I can recall at the time, I wouldn't say that there was, and I wouldn't say it then nor now, that there's a single collective project. But I would say that it was very clear that there were projects that were in dialogue with each other, that the students were, there's a certain positive sense of kind of, I don't know if competition is the right word, but that they recognize students who are working on a similar topic, and they are able to, I think, figure out how to differentiate the thing that they're working on from someone who may have a similar interest. And I think that always struck me as really positive, that I could leave here and say, wow, I saw like 4 or 5 projects that were working on X. But I think the students have a sense of responsibility and ambition to make sure that while they're in conversation with others, that they find an aspect of the project that they can go narrow into. So that they can, I mean, the best thesis for me would almost be able to say, I know that there are others that are working on this problem in this way, and I'm working on it in this way. Or they're choosing to begin with these priorities, and I'm selecting to begin this process with these priorities. And for me, that ability to both know your surroundings, know your who you're in dialogue with, but also be able, and maybe that's related to what John was saying, that like build some type of internal project that you recognize is your own, even though it needs to be in dialogue with a broader group of people.
I definitely think that thesis is a moment where students take what they've learned and produce a variation of that. I think it's clear that because of the structure of thesis and because of the fact that who teaches thesis usually teaches core, that's to me it's very important, that connection, so that the fundamentals that they've been taught in core, they go into the most advanced project where the students are much more mature and they take that problem and they make it their own. Therefore, they diversify. There's a delta. There is a gap between the fundamentals that they're taught to what they come out with. And the fact that the students and the faculty work together at the end of the career, at the beginning of the career as well, I think creates a loop of change in the school, so that whoever teaches the fundamentals also teaches at the end of the core, at the end of the whole curriculum, which means that they are exposed to the change and how their project goes into the hands of somebody else's project, and therefore gets enriched and changed, and then they go back to core with a new vision, a new facet, a new shade of this. I think it actually is an engine of change. I think thesis has been the engine of change of the core, and I do think there is a fast moving animal. I mean, I think it moves sometimes even faster than what we would like to do, because sometimes you have to be with a problem or with a subject for some time. You invent and you change, and it's a fast moving pace. I want to thank Kristy, John, and Donald for being with us today at the Spin Room, for their thoughts about thesis and the future of thesis. We started with Hernán talking about the past 15 years of thesis. We had like a memory lane of the projects that had been done that were pivotal to the creation of the curriculum in the school, and we end with the new coordinator, Kristy and John, because their ideas will somehow shape the next steps of this important moment for the curriculum of the school. Thank you to all of you, and good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elena.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.